Life's better when you're empty inside.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. It's nice to meet you here.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for inviting me.
No, of course. I am a huge fan of your work and have been for my entire, I guess, a large portion of my life. So thank you for doing what you do.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's always surprising because we work in such, for us, it's just, day in and day out. And we have very little contact with the people that watch the movies, actually. We just work and so I'm always surprised when I have this weird cognitive dissonance of, oh yeah, people see these. Like other people watch these. Oh yeah. Huh. Yeah. It's always
people, but like everybody watches them, everyone on earth.
Yeah. We're so removed from that though. Like it's always a weird thing that you kind of like, I think intellectually I know that because I see, bus ads and stuff. And, but whenever it happens, you're kind of reminded, it's like, oh yeah, huh. Yeah, people do watch these things,
We're doing this huge thing. Cool.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about it is it never feels big. It always feels like 4 or 5 maximum, like for us anyway, 10 people in a room. And you never really feel we really are completely isolated from the scale and from all of that stuff, like we don't. It's a weird kind of, we're like Santa's elves, we're off kind of in the workshop, and yeah, it's always weird. I never get used to it really.
It's so wild to hear because it just seems like, Pixar of all places, it just seems like you guys would be so constantly aware of the global impact you have, but the fact that it still feels kind of contained and creative, that's really awesome. That's such an accomplishment. I feel like to maintain that.
Yeah, it's funny. We work in Emeryville, and I live, like 8 minutes away in Oakland, and it really just feels like you go to work with your friends, kind of, and I work in stories, so it's you're in a room with like 10 people usually maximum.
Wow.
Most of the time, you're in your office just thinking about characters and things like that, and it's very it'd be like if I made shoes, it feels like that. Like you make your thing and you just like, you think about it and you put love into it, but it's, we don't ever, I think it'd be like if we were in like a band or something,
yeah,
you would know because you're in front of people and you get that feedback. Whereas for us, we don't ever get that feedback. It's always, we just make the movies, it comes out, we see it and we go, oh yeah. Uh-huh. And then but by that point, you're already halfway through the next one. So
that's really interesting. Do you think there's something helpful about not getting that immediate feedback? Because I feel like sometimes maybe it's possible to be reinforced by an audience for the wrong aspect of the project. You know what I mean? Like, oh, maybe they're laughing at a thing that's like not, that's not that funny to you or something. And then you're like, oh, well, that actually veered me more away from my vision.
Well, the thing that I don't know how much everyone knows about the process of Pixar and story, but we work. I work on the movie so I've been here 14 years, roughly, and I've worked on maybe 8 to 10 movies. Yeah, 8 to 10 movies.
Wow.
But like Toy Story 3, Monsters University, Finding Dory, those were all 3.5-year stints. So I'm working on the movie for 3.5 years. And so when Finding Dory was released, I was already halfway through Coco. And so we go, the movie comes out and it's like, oh yeah, I remember when a year and a half ago when we made that movie. Oh yeah. It's like, wow, they finished it. I guess that's pretty cool. And you're already kind of going like, what is Miguel going to say to Imelda at this part? I don't know. And you're walking around with different characters in your mind all the time.
It's interesting because in a sense, I feel like creativity and each creative project is almost like its own relationship. So you're essentially on to the next relationship and like in the middle of it and working through the kinks and problems of that relationship. And it'd be like revisiting an old one. So that'd be, maybe that's a bad analogy because nobody wants to relationship. But.
No, it's exactly, it's kind of like that. The way I like to describe it, I mean, it's kind of talked about a little bit, is that each movie feels like high school. But when you finish high school, you go on to college. And when the movie comes out, it's the equivalent of you're now in your like sophomore year of college and you get your high school yearbook. And then you look through it and you go, oh yeah, remember when we did that? Or, hey, I remember when that person said this thing. And you don't really watch the movies. Like when you sort of start at Pixar in the story department, you basically sort of sign a waiver saying, I'm never going to watch a Pixar movie again the way that I did, because you don't ever watch the movie that way again. You know, when I see a movie, I don't know whether it's like, you're so close to it. You worked on it for 3.5 years. You know every line by heart. You know exactly when that line was better, but now it's not. Or like, this used to be really terrible, but now it's great. So you don't experience the same movies the same way. So it really does feel like when I watch the movies now, it's like flipping through a yearbook. It's like, oh, I remember when we were doing this, or we took the movie to Disney now, and remember when we went on that research trip, and it doesn't really doesn't like, I don't watch it like a movie. Like I don't, you know.
Yeah, it seems very fun, but such a different kind of experience because it's so focused on like the micro, and you have all the knowledge of the ins and outs as opposed to like the macro, and seeing it as everybody else, as the audience sees it, for just like this beautiful film with this fully fleshed arc, and they don't know all the little trials and tribulations along the way.
No, I think that's the one thing. I think the one thing that that folks who don't work in animation or don't make the movies, I think the thing that I think is surprising to people, or they don't know, is that, you know, in story, again, we work on it for 3.5 years. We remake the movie pretty much end to end with music and score and voice actors and everything in storyboard form about 8 to 10 times. And
You're kidding me.
No, so we do a first screening of something. We write the script. The script is, people are happy with it. Yeah. We pretty much know going in that we get it to a point where everyone can sort of pick out 1 or 2 scenes and go, yeah, these scenes are pretty good. Like the rest of it, you know, I'm not really sure what the movie's about yet. And the characters aren't really as fun as they're going to be. We sort of know where you're going. So what ends up happening is like the best scenes of your first screening in a perfect world become the worst scenes of your second screening. And so because everything else, it teaches the rest of the movie how to step up around it.
Wow.
Then the process sort of repeats a lot, and 8 or 10 times over the course of 3 years. And it's in an effort to sort of get to what I feel like we all think of at Pixar as a Pixar movie. You know,
right. It's a really cool process, and I wish more live action films incorporated it, like doing the idea of storyboarding a film and then trashing it and then storyboarding it, because I feel like, I mean, Pixar is certainly known for its characters, but also it's sort of airtight stories. And I wonder what it would be if you didn't have those 8 to 10 storyboard sessions of just starting from scratch. That seems like a process that everyone should incorporate. I think we'd have better movies. Yeah,
I mean, I think for the animation, we sort of have to go that way because it's easy to board it, and it's really hard once you make it. You're kind of stuck. I mean, so we end up doing it that way because it makes the most sense. But typically, I think the thing that we find is that, I think everyone thinks that you start with a theme and you kind of work your way into clarifying that theme. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's sort of something to that, but you really have to, I look at it like you're kind of exploring the subject, and you're going to find things along the way that you didn't know that you were looking for. And then those become those profound kind of epiphanies that I think ideally our movies are kind of known for, is that we really do I sort of feel like I have this thing about it, but I view a movie really is like you need three legs of a stool. And a lot of people talk about emotion or they talk about comedy.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that sets the movies that you remember and you leave with and you think about is they have a philosophy and there's a takeaway and there's an intellectual component that you sort of walk away from and go, a movie can leave you laughing, a movie can make you feel something, but the movies that you make you think are the ones that really stay with you.
Yes.
And so we spend a lot of time really trying to understand the philosophical takeaway for the audience. And so when you think about a movie like Inside Out, it's like, the idea that you have to learn to embrace sadness in order to live a complete life.
Oh my God.
That's not something that they started with. I mean, that was something that was found. And that's one of my favorite Pixar movies. And
yeah.
And I think that the idea that we aim to express that and we want the audience to walk away with something that they can use and they can think about it now. You think about it later, but it's also something that we all feel. It all comes from an emotional place, which is then acts as a conduit for a philosophical statement and something that you believe as a worldview or as something that you figured out about the way that people work and how to be better or happier or more fulfilled. I think it's something that we always look for. And in animation, that's kind of the difference between live action animation is that we can speak pretty directly in analogies because we can make things that are fish. So we can make a movie like Toy Story where you're using child's playthings to talk about growing up.
Right.
Child's playthings away. And so it becomes about parenthood. It's about childhood. It's about maturity. And so we kind of try to do that as much as possible, which again takes a bunch of passes at it to really unearth it. And it's a little bit like we talk about it, like it's like climbing a mountain.
Yeah.
It's always hard. There's really no shortcuts. But the higher up the mountain you go, the further that you can see. And so the more that you can see,
totally,
the better, the more enlightened you are, the more you understand what you're really doing. You understand the reason to climb the mountain, the higher you go. And so that's the 8 screenings is going up the mountain and trying to see as much as you can and learn as much as you can. And it's why we research. It's why we talk to experts in the fields that we're talking about, because, it's about educating ourselves so that we can make the most potent and ideally, profound philosophical statement.
Right. The philosophy behind Inside Out and the overall message of it is, I think, one of the most profound messages that I've ever seen in a film and a topic that had never been talked about before then. And I believe Inside Out was sort of the catalyst for mental health being such a big conversation these days. I think it sort of started all of it. I think it's going to make for healthier children. Like that movie just makes me so happy that it exists. How are those nuggets found? The philosophy nuggets, is that like a discussion post storyboarding? Is it like you guys just, how do those come about?
I think, so the other thing I've done, I'm a story artist. I've been a story artist forever, but I'm a lead story artist now. And for the last about 5 or so years, I've been in development before the movies become the movies. So I work with directors when they have sort of 3 ideas that they want to pitch, and I just kind of help them get those ideas in shape. And, the majority of that time is spent talking to them about what kind of movie you want to make, and what do you feel? And I have this whole thing that I do with directors at that point where I talk to them about, again, I think in the 3 legs of the stool, that there are 3 ways to explore an idea: intellectually, emotionally, and philosophically. And the emotional experiences are the things that happen to you. The intellectual is how you want to talk about them in an analogical standpoint, like why fish, why emotions, why a garbage planet kind of thing. Those are all movies that were made before me, but and the third is philosophical, which is, what are the emotional experiences in your life? What did they teach you about the world? And what do you have to communicate? And so in a sense, it's trying to get at, everyone says, write what you know, but how do you know what you know? And so a lot of the times, one of the questions I ask in those folks is that oftentimes the way that is is sort of, I think, typical to start, is that you look at the things you like and the movies that you sort of watch. And one of the questions I ask of the directors then is, put that aside. Everyone has like a 30 or 40 movies that they love. What are the movies that you watched where you walked out of the theater and went, oh my God, ... shit.
Yeah.
They got there first. Like, I wish I had made this movie. I wish this was me saying this. And that question ends up being fertile ground for, we all like Raiders of the Lost Ark, but maybe you don't want to make Raiders of the Lost Ark. Maybe you want to make, Magnolia. And the reason you want to make Magnolia is because you hooked into this story. And the reason you hooked into this story was because you had a relationship that was like that you feel like you need to talk about.
Yes.
And so once we start doing that way, it really becomes like, what do you want to talk about? Who are the relationships that mean things to you? What are things that wind you up? What are things that you don't understand, that bother you, but you can't quite reconcile? And those end up becoming, the things that we sort of explore. And so because they're esoteric and because they're on the periphery of a person's understanding, they end up taking 8 screenings. But I think ideally you kind of start from those kind of impulses. And you start with questions more so than statements, so that, you can arrive at a statement because of all your questions. And so, I think it takes time, and but I think that's kind of where we start. On Toy Story 3, I remember really early. I lived in Toronto at the time, and they called me on the phone and said that I was going to work on the movie when I got hired. And I thought to myself, like, oh, this must be about the toys being given away, because that's the only reason you have left to go. And then, of course, I showed up, and Michael Arndt and they had already talked about this, and it was already well underway. But Michael Arndt tried to talk about, like, okay, what does it mean for that to happen? And so he went through all the movies, and he created the spine of, like, the first movie is about being replaced, and it's a very childish concern. And then the second is about the other gate that everyone walks to, which is your mortality, recognizing that you're fallible. And then the third is learning how to let go. And so that's sort of where those kind of things kind of start. And we then try to find over the rest of the lifespan of the movie, we try to find ways to articulate that and be as concise as possible, and as, efficient and interesting and surprising and all the stuff that you need to do in a movie. I think a lot of the times it starts with like a small kind of personal feeling that you try to, like, it's either an observation about yourself or something that you believe, and then they start to go off. And the directors that I've worked with recently, a lot of it is, it's an experience that you're living with, and you can't stop thinking about. And that becomes fertile ground to really explore. And you find that you had opinions you didn't even know you had about it.
Right. I think that vulnerability so translates into Pixar films. I think that level of vulnerability also, I think, is the only way for things to really connect universally. Like, when you go more personal, it's such a weird oxymoron of like, well, but then that's more about me, or something might be a fear behind it. But I feel like that's the only way to really connect to people, is when you go to those dark, uncomfortable, sometimes ugly, scary places. Yeah. And I feel that in all Pixar films. It's wild to me too, because I have always thought that really a singular vision is important to make art that does connect in that way, as opposed to a lot of collaboration I judge as like, oh, well, then it's going to be too many cooks in the kitchen. And then how does the concept not get lost? And how does the spirit of a project not get lost? So how, in a place like Pixar, that's really known for its creative collaboration, does the heart and soul of a project not get lost?
I think it's not binary. I think it does sometimes. And then we try to pull it back. I mean, usually, you're, especially when you're finding it, and every movie is totally different from every other movie. But the other thing that people don't really maybe know is how bad our movies are for how long. Like we do eight, most of the time we do 8 screenings because you watch the first couple and you're like, oh man, yikes. Because we're taking baby steps, like we're learning everything again, it seems like. But usually what ends up happening is that you show something and at some point it becomes undeniable. I remember for Inside Out, it didn't start about sadness, but once you saw that, it was like, oh, okay, let's all like,
yep,
of course. And so usually that's kind of what happens is that things it feels like we kind of paint really messily at first, but then one thing will lock in and then everyone kind of gets it. And it becomes, instead of it being, it starts, I think, as a singular vision, which it is, but then once you know what it is, then you can talk about then you can add to that, what the sheet music is. Now everyone just plays along. Mm-hmm. And we do our best to emphasize and to clarify rather than try to steer the vision in a different direction. It's about taking those ideas and then populating them throughout the movie so that it has a richness and a variety of expressions of that kind of idea that, that is kind of how we do it. I mean, it takes a long time. So that's partly it. And again, the 8 screenings don't move in a linear sense. Like you'll have 2 that go great, you'll have 2 that go bad, and it feels like a step back. And you sort of keep moving forward. And it's always asking, really, what are we trying to accomplish? Like, what are we trying to say?
Right.
That gets said a lot. And it's frustrating because if you don't know, then you don't know how to answer that question.
Sure.
Because if I knew how to say it, I would say it. But, I think that part's hard. It's hard. But you never, I think part of what's helpful about the collaboration is also, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're making something alone, if you get stuck or you get like down on a project, it's really a hole to dig yourself out of. And I think, especially because we're drawing it at the same time, you don't like your own work ever because you're trying to solve all these problems. Yeah. So all you can really see is the ones you didn't solve. So it's really sometimes helpful to have people come along and say, this is what you did was great. Or like, I like this part, or I like this part. And you go, oh, really? And like I said, I work in development now and I'm working with a bunch of my friends. And so my job mainly now is to be counsel, but to also remind them of their value and remind them of their worth and that, the thing that they want to say is important to hear and that it's not baked yet, but it's not supposed to be. And, I think it's doing things all completely on your own is really, really hard. Yeah. So, I think, it is a mixed bag and you can sort of have to fight for the thing you want, but, and the directors they really are in it. But, usually when it locks in, you kind of get it. Usually something locks in.
Hearing that directors come to you with sort of 3 ideas is so interesting. It's sort of like 3, is it like seeds of ideas? Are they basic outlines? Like how much do they have to have fleshed out before they say, hey, can you take a look at these?
Well, usually, because like I'm a little, as the older directors or newer directors have started to come up, I should say, a lot of them are just my peers anyway. And so they just happen to be really talented friends of mine. So they just sort of, it's really more like you're asking your friend for feedback rather than it being as formal. But usually it starts as like, I know I have to pitch 3 and I don't know what those are yet. And so it really becomes about like, let's talk, and they work with a host of other people. We have people come in, but it's really like, what do you want to talk about? And typically what happens is that the last couple have been, I know what they have, what their story they want to tell is. So it's really about figuring out, like, if you tell that with sharks, what does that look like? If you told that with, like, how do we get the thing that you feel and want to express, how do we get that out the clearest? And oftentimes we just talk about, it's going through photo albums and talking about what their psychic landscape is and their sort of philosophical intentions are. And it's really about, it starts there kind of. And then we generate, 3 outlines, or 3 pitch outlines. And then those get shown. And pretty typically I feel like the thing that people want to say finds a way no matter what. That's been my experience. The thing that that you can talk about,
it pushes through.
It pushes through because everything goes through that filter. Like every one of us is unique. Every one of us has a worldview that they subscribe to. And so it's really about like, how clearly can you articulate and understand within yourself what that worldview is? And then it comes out. A lot of it starts there, and just it's a very not glamorous process, and it's very start from nothing and talk about your family and stuff. But it's I feel very privileged in that those people trust me to be that way.
Yeah,
and we're very vulnerable, and it's very. I really I take a lot of pride in that people respect me enough to be that vulnerable and share those things. And it's really fun. And those movies are not going to be coming out for another 7 years or something probably. But it's really rewarding. It's really fun.
Are there instances where you've thought, oh, this is for sure the winner of the 3, the one that will be chosen of the 3, whatever you want to call it, and that's just not what happened? Or you're like, what? How did that not make it?
Yeah. Because I feel like at that point it's my job it's like self-designated. It's my role to go. I kind of say like, all 3 of these are great. Like
right.
We're great. All 3 of these are great. And the truth is, it's like it's not how. Ideas get chosen or not chosen for millions of reasons. So
sure.
That part's okay. So
yeah.
Usually what ends up happening in that case where things don't get chosen, it always goes back down to like, hey, remember that story you told me about this? Like, I think you could, just remember that that's what you're doing, And again, like I said, the stuff always comes up. The stuff that you really care about kind of comes up. And I think you can see filmmakers that make similar movies, but in different sort of, from different perspectives or different shades of the same idea. I think that's kind of how movies work. It means that person really feels strongly about the thing, and they need to continue to talk about it. And so I think that's kind of, it's kind of how that works. It all starts from a really, like I said, unglamorous emotional place of something you just feel like you really need to get off your chest. It's figuring out how to write what I think we all know what that means intellectually, but like, what does that actually look like in terms of a process? Like, how do I start writing what I know tomorrow?
Right.
It's like you have to. So that was where the whole like 3 lines of inquiry in terms of emotional, intellectual, and philosophical kind of came out of, was asking myself like, how do I write what I know? and trying to solve that problem before I could start to solve all the other problems that you're going to have in creating something, is be very conscious of what goes into a thing that I respond to. And once you know the ingredients, you can manufacture it. But
in the way that you describe how some filmmakers they'll sort of say the same message from different perspectives, different points of view. Do you feel like you have a sort of essential truth or spirit or vulnerability thing that you feel most passionate about sharing?
Yeah. So whenever I've asked that question of folks, what movies would you want to make?
Yeah.
There's 3 that I have.
Yeah.
One is The Tree of Life, the Terrence Malick movie, which blew me away.
Yeah.
The second is The Place Beyond the Pines.
Oh my God, it's so good.
Yeah, it's
so good.
Yeah, it's amazing. And
it's incredible.
I watched it like a bunch of times when it came out, and I was like all bummed out that someone else made it before me. And the third, there's filmmakers actually, so it's not one movie, but
Okay.
The Dardenne brothers, they made a movie called The Kid with a Bike. They made a movie called L'Enfant. They made a movie called The Son. They're Belgian brothers, and they make these movies that are just like emotionally, they're very deceptively simple. In that they usually follow the characters around, and it's very verite or very documentary feeling.
Yeah, love that.
But the way their structure is very solid. Their act one, their transitions from the first act into the second act are like concussive. Like you can't put the movie down, and you're as an example, like in L'Enfant, it's about a guy who's trying to come to grips with being a father, and he's like a young kid.
Yeah, and
he's kind of like a schemy kind of guy. The act one break is that he sells his newborn baby, and then the second act is he has to go get it back.
Okay, great.
And so you can't turn it off, really.
Yeah.
But their movies are full of these like personal, they're these observations that I found myself. I was just like, oh my God, like that's exactly what I want to talk about. That's how I want to speak. That's like, that's how I think. Like the movies affect me so deeply.
Yeah.
And circling back, or when I zoomed out a little bit, is that with The Place Beyond the Pines and The Tree of Life and those films, is that it's really about legacy. It's about what you give from your parents. It's about realizing that there's a scene in The Place Beyond the Pines where Ryan Gosling is handed his son for the first time, and he wipes his hands first because he doesn't think that he's clean enough, and he's aware of his own failings. And I feel like it's this. I feel like as a father, like I grew up in a kind of weird environment, and when I became a father, I was very clearly, I had that articulated, is that like, I had a strained relationship with my father. So as a son, I was wrestling in the shadow with that, and then being handed the responsibility of being a father to someone else.
Wow.
When my son was born, you become acutely aware now of like what's in front of you, in a way that you can't in the abstract. And then there's no going back. And so when I saw that scene in the movie, I was like, oh my God, I've lived through that. I know exactly what that feels like. And Sean Bobbitt is the DP. And there's a whole bunch of things about that I love, about the way that movie shot.
Right.
Derek Cianfrance has a real way of getting under the skin of things. But so those are the ones for me. And it evoked this idea of like, oh, I need to talk about things about toxic masculinity, growing up with violence, growing up with things like that. I mean, that's kind of, and I've written a few things like along those lines, but it's where it all starts from. And those three. And in animation, I would say Spider-Verse, but that's
I haven't seen Spider-Verse. I need to see it. I've heard that it's great.
Oh my God. Yeah. Those guys really push the boat out. It's amazing. Yeah.
So did you grow up in Canada?
Yeah. I grew up in a town called London, Ontario, Canada. I always tell people Toronto, because every time I say like, oh, I'm from London, people go, oh, you don't have an accent. And I'm like, well, no, I'm from like the bad version of the good city, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I grew up in Canada. And as when I was a kid, I think I kind of knew two things pretty exclusively, which was like, one, I kind of wanted to make movies or be an artist, or I was circling a bunch of things. And then two, I wanted to leave the city that I grew up in really, really badly. And so that was kind of the only two things that I was like 100% for sure about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had to, I think ironically, I think Ryan Gosling is from the same place.
No kidding.
Justin Bieber was born like I think he lived in St. Thomas, which is just outside of London.
No water.
But as I've gotten older, when I was a kid, it was the 90s and everything was angsty because Nirvana was around. But, I think we all went through the same thing.
Yeah.
We're in it. But as I've gotten older, I realized my good fortune, particularly being in the States where, it's very different from Canada. When I was very, very young, my mother was a huge Disney fan. And so I kind of osmosed to that, and I wanted to be an artist. And I was like, okay, I think I can be an artist or an animator. And it just worked out that there's an academic high school that was in the city that I lived in.
Wow.
And it wasn't my like zoned one, but it was so like it basically taught 1 or 2 grades above what that grade was. So you really had to kind of catch up. And about a mile away from that school, there was an art school that was just an art high school, pretty much. And by the 11th grade, if you choose to specialize, you can go to the academic high school in the morning and just study the academics. And then it was called road running. You would run over to the other school over your lunch hour. And then the whole back half of the day was just art. And so I was doing like photography and like painting and drawing and all that stuff then. And so, from about the 10th or 11th grade on, that's kind of all I was doing all day was drawing and painting and taking photos and animating and things like that. So, I thinking about it now in the context of living in the States is I imagine if I were to do that now, it'd be like $80,000 a year or something. But
oh my God.
Yeah. In Canada, it was like they put a lot into the arts budgets there. So I was very, very lucky that I was able to, to do that. And I knew pretty early on that that's what I wanted to do. And like I said, it was part of my goal was to just like leave school. So, and to leave the city and to just, I always had this very clear fear that like I always thought that like great people come from great places. So if I want to be anybody, if I want to do something that I love, then I have to really work super hard. And so as a result, I was like not a model student really. Like I did like for like typical high school, like biology and science and stuff.
Yeah.
I hadn't had enough for it that I think I can count on one hand the amount of time I did homework in high school. And I always got fine grades. Like I never failed or anything, but I put everything into like from minute one, the minute I got to high school, it was like, I know I'm going to be an animator. I know this is what I'm going to do. I know I'm going to make movies. And a lot of that when I was 12, my mom, again, huge Disney buff, visited the studio somehow and met an animator. And she said, well, my son, it's that whole thing of like, my son wants to be an artist, that embarrassing thing. And then when I was like 12, I visited and I had all these drawings that I was doing from Roger Rabbit. And they told me then that they were like, come back when you're 20 and we'll give you a job. Ha ha ha, And I was a kid. I was like, okay, I will.
Done. Yeah.
I will do that. I will. Yeah, I'll see you. What's your number? And so from that point on, I pretty much knew that was what I was going to do. And, even when I was in art school, that's kind of what I did. I just dedicated myself to it. And I was very fortunate at that point. It's something that I've learned later in life, but I had one teacher in my art high school who loved me and thought I was great. And when he wasn't there, he'd have me teach the life drawing class, and he was very supportive of me. And then I had 2 other teachers that thought I was like the biggest ding dong that walked the earth. And I realized that at the time I was like, oh, those guys just don't know, and I'm going to do it because I wouldn't listen to anyone. I was like, I know what I have to do. I know that to get into art, to get into animation school as a college, I need a portfolio. I don't need grades. So like, who cares? Like they would give me like, I had like a textiles class that I got 8% in. Because like, I'm not going to need this. I don't care.
Yeah.
And the teacher that loved me kind of was like, he's dedicated. And the 2 that didn't, were kind of hard on me. And I had to do painting. I was a painting and drawing teacher, and I had to do painting and drawing for him. And I handed him 50 life drawings. And he was like, yes, but this is a painting and drawing class. And I was like, I know that, but I teach the class. I like teaching the class. And I was full of myself and all stupid, And he was like, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 1% for every one of these drawings. So you're currently sitting at 50%. And he walked away. It wasn't about the work. It wasn't about anything like that. And I realized then that having an ally and having an advocate, but also having an antagonist is super important. That because on the one hand, I would have the teacher tell me how great I was, and I didn't believe him. And I was like, I don't know what he sees, but I want to be the person he thinks I am. And then when I had the antagonist on the other side, I had someone who was like challenging me and telling me that I was like a dipshit. I was like, I'm going to show that person that I'm not what they think I am, and I'm going to become the thing. And so like you have the positive and the negative, and I really pushed myself to do that. And I think, it's not a model for anyone in high school, but it certainly helped me. And I think it helped me to like learn the humility that it takes to do something for real, but also, I initially, I was like mad that those teachers were like that. But as I got older, I realized like how valuable that was.
Right.
To have someone push on me and tell me things that I was kind of being a ding dong, and like, that the world doesn't lay down to me at 18. I think it's a really good lesson. And to have two of them gang up on me was great, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I wasn't.
So in high school, that was when you first knew sort of that you wanted to become an artist, or did you have earlier inklings when you were, do you remember anything sort of prior to that Disney memory with your mom?
Yeah, no, that was it. I mean, when I was a kid, that was kind of, I remember all the kids, I was always I had the great benefit actually of never being the best kid in class. I really liked drawing, but there was always someone who I looked at and I was like, oh my God, that person's way better than me. And I don't think
benefit. How is that a benefit?
Because I think if you're the best and you know it, and everyone around you knows it, and everyone around you tells you that, I think it makes you weird or something. Like, I don't know. Yeah. I think that would be a really tough thing to put on someone, And I think that part of what I think my journey to Pixar was, there was a point where I was working in Toronto and I was working in TV, and DreamWorks called me and said that they wanted me to do a storyboard test for them. This is like 2005 or 4, I want to say. And I quit my job because I wanted to put everything into this test, because at that point, that's kind of how I was, all eggs in one basket, And so I quit my job and I did the test, and I pins and needles waited for them to get back to me. They got back to me and they said, we liked what you did, but we're not interested in you. We're not going to hire you. And you need to work on these things. And I remember distinctly feeling pretty bad about it, feeling pretty bummed out. And I got up from my table. I walked around the block, and I basically did a big circle, and I went right back to my drawing desk and kept working. And
that says so much about you.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things that later on I realized, like, oh yeah. And then literally a week after that, I had 4 calls from other studios.
Wow.
And one of them was Pixar. And I was working on a book to show them because I didn't think I was good enough, very obviously at that point. And they had seen work I had done, and they called me and said, hey, we want to come talk to you. And I had told myself at that point, hell or high water, I was going to get hired by the time I was 27. I was 25 at the time.
Whoa.
And I was like, I'm going to get hired by 27. And my interview was a week before my 27th birthday. And I got hired 2 months after. So
there it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was something that learning to deal with failure as a teacher and using something that's negative rather than saying, that's a label that is now applied to me, that it's an obstacle to overcome. Was really helpful for me later, And when I was at school, my wife is actually a production designer at Pixar, and we were at school together. And I was struggling my last year of college to make a film. In animation school, you have to make a film. And I was really struggling with it because at the time, again, Canada has great arts funding. So I was going to the Cinematheque, and I was watching Kieslowski, and I was watching early Godard and the Battle of Algiers. And I was really impacted by that. And I just started sinking and feeling like I'm never going to make a film that good. I don't know how to do any of this. And so I made a film in third year. It's disaster. But I worked really, really hard on it. And I would talk to the advisors about it. And they ended up passing me, I think, and letting me graduate, even though I didn't have a film. Because one of the teachers told me that it's obvious you really want to become a filmmaker and you're trying really, really hard. And it's not going to, that's not the way things work. Like, you're not going to become a filmmaker in 2 months just because we say you have a deadline.
Right.
And you said, of everyone in your year, I can see that you're the one that's reaching to make a real, instead of just doing a portfolio piece to get a job, you're trying to make a film. And the fact that you're failing horribly at it at the moment doesn't mean that you're going to fail at it forever. And so it was this really, the teacher's Jerry Zeldin, and
what a great teacher.
He's the best. He passed recently, but yeah, he was the man. And my wife and I and my friend, another friend of mine, we all had the same thing where we didn't finish our films. They were a disaster, and we were the first 3 to get the Pixar out of our class.
No kidding.
Yeah, all three of us. And at the time, you got to the end of college and you're staring out at the abyss. It's like you don't know what you're going to do, and all you're feeling is failing, and all you're feeling is like I didn't make the thing. I didn't do what everyone else did. But at the same time, it was like getting bad grades in high school. I knew that it's not about now; it's about then. And I'm becoming something, and I believe that I'm going to become something, and I'm not going to stop until I get there. And so, just because I'm not there now doesn't mean I'm never going to get there. And so, I think early on, having enough negative feedback and learning to sort of deal with that really set the table. And, I think it was one of those things, it all felt like when I first got to Pixar, the same thing happened where you get to Pixar and everyone, as a kid, everyone's amazing. And you have Andrew Stanton and Brad Bird walking around. It's and Steve Jobs at the time was walking around.
Can't imagine.
And it was rarefied air, yeah. And I remember the first screening I worked on was for Toy Story 3. And the first scene I ever did was Lotso flipping Buzz over into demo mode and everything and all that. And then the second scene that I was given by Lee Unkrich, which I'll be forever grateful for him for this, was the incinerator. Was when the toys are going down into
classic
fiery heat death. Yeah. And the weight of that scene killed me. And I was really terrified of it. And my mom at the time was really sick. And so, and she passed away before the movie came out.
Oh.
Yeah. And so doing that scene, I was thinking about that, and I had all that in my head. We show the first screening and we watch it all. And I walked out and I said to my head of story, he was like, "Hey, great job, everyone. We're doing the posting." And I went up to him and I said, "I'm fired, aren't I? I'm not good enough. I'm going to get fired." And he was like, "Oh, what? What are you talking about?" And then, and shortly after, that was a real low moment for me. I came out going I'm the weak link in the chain here. I let everyone down.
Why were you thinking that? Just because of what was on screen, or because of you were affected by, you were so, what was the? Because
all I could see was the things I wasn't doing. And I was like, oh, I want to be better at this. And next time I'm going to do this. And I'm so used to that. And then that was a real low point for me. And then, 10 minutes later, we go in the brain trust with all my heroes essentially. And it was the high point of my career at Pixar, I think, which at that point, they stood before everyone. Usually the brain trust all gets together after a movie and they talk about it. And usually people it's awkward if it doesn't go well, then they have to find a way to start that conversation. But at that point, the sort of heads of the place or whatever at the time said, "I just want to say that that scene with the incinerator, oh my God, that's, you guys have this movie, you got it." And the director Lee turned to me and said, "It was him." And again, I thought I was going to get fired. So that's where my head was at. And I can't take credit for it. I mean, Lee is amazing, and he did all of it. I mean, it's his idea, it was his, and I was just his hands. But that was like a real watershed moment for me in terms of like how I perceive myself and how I perceive, because I was so, you know, you get in that mindset of like, I need to be better. I need to get better. I need to get better. I need to get better. And you realize that, you know, that was always about, it's not about now, it's about then. It's about getting somewhere. It's about being better. And then you realize like, oh, I might be at now. Like what my old then was, I might be there now. And then, you know, that lasts, and then, you know, it gets hard again because you know, you're always pushed to be better. But I kind of, I don't know. Yeah, I think it was always that way. Like, nothing comes really easy, I don't think. So, yeah.
Right. So your father was in the picture, or he wasn't in the picture from an early age?
Yeah. I grew up in a pretty normal house, or household, whatever, but you know, it was the 90s again, so everyone was angsty.
Yeah.
And so my parents, you know, it got pretty dysfunctional at a point. So it ended up being okay, I think, because the way that kind of high school is that, again, I had this clear idea that I wanted to move out and sit in read pretentious books and go to cafes and be pretentious and smart and everything like that. And pretty soon that happened. I mean, I think in high school, I had English classes where I was meant to write short stories and plays and things like that. And I can, you know, and that's kind of what I did. You know, I would just kind of sit around and start writing plays in high school. And I had a lot of time, you know, a time to deal with that. My mom was a nurse, and my dad had his own business. So they were just occupied all the time. So I was kind of just like left to determine what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And when I was in that age, I really did feel lost, and I really struggled. And I know that that's sort of what you get into on this, but I really struggled with anxiety. And at that age, like it was like really, really difficult. And it took me a long time to figure out how to get out of that myself, but and create tools for myself to but again, I think now as an artist, when I have to go and pitch in front of a room full of people, or I have to go and fly to Disney and do a presentation for 80 people, I don't know, the tools that, you know, I felt like when I was 16 and I didn't know what the future was going to be, and I was just dreading it and not able to get out of bed, and finding the tools then to pick myself up and say, you know, like, again, then not now. It enabled, I didn't know at the time, to be honest, but as I got older, I realized like, oh, the reason that I can get through this stuff now is because I kind of went through it then. And
right. 100%. It's amazing how difficult upbringings or any sort of trial that somebody experiences, I feel like can really be instrumental in maintaining the stresses that come with the success like that you experience. It's wild how that sort of paved the way in a sense for your life now.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's something that as a father I try to talk to my son about, and I think that it's, you know, we talk about the 8 screenings at Pixar and what those 8 screenings like actually look like, and how I think it serves as a metaphor for the way that you grew up and you become anybody, is that you eat failure all the time. Like, you know, when I talked earlier about we don't really see the movies the same way as everyone else, you know, for us as a story person, the biggest charge you get is kind of what I described, is you show the screening, and then if you do a great job and you absolutely kill it, people come up to you afterwards and be like, hey, I saw your scene, it's amazing. You know, like that's, oh my God, you know. Recently I did a scene in Onward at the beginning of the movie where Ian's looking at the pictures of his father, and he has kind of a moment to try to connect. At the time, I thought I had lung cancer because I had gone in for an X-ray because I couldn't breathe or whatever, and they had nodules in both my lungs. And yeah, and
oh my God.
Yeah, and so they didn't know what it was, and they didn't tell me, so I had to do scans and scans and scans. And so for about 2 months, that's all I was thinking about.
Yeah.
And I made videos for my son because I was like, he might not know me.
Wow.
And so then cut to 2 months later, I get a call from the doctor and they were like, you know what? It's just, you had like a pneumonia and we didn't know it was pneumonia and you're totally fine. You're all good. But like, I had like a trench hollowed out of me at that point from that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they asked me to do that scene in Onward about a father that's trying to connect with his son and a son trying to connect with his father over a divide. And so it's just, I was like, I know exactly what this is. And so when I pitched it, before I pitched it, I showed pictures of my son and I was like, this is what I'm going to do, and the scene gets pitched and afterwards, and I forget about it because that's how it works. Like I went on to Coco, I think.
Yeah.
Or I'm back to Coco or Luca maybe even. And afterwards the editor came up to me and said, hey, we cut your scene. It's great. Like it's really playing and you really did a great job. And for us, that's the win, like that's where you get it. And then you forget about it. And then the movie comes out and I'm like, oh yeah, I did that. I totally forgot about that happened. But the other side's true as well is like, we show screenings and they don't work and you put your heart into something and it doesn't work. And it really is hard. I mean, that part is like the one thing that is a testament to Pixar is that we make these movies and they hurt and we keep making them the same way. And it hurts the same way all the time. And people, when you invest as a person for 3 years, and you put stories like that of yourself into them, when you watch the screening and it's not working and it's not right, and you can see people shuffling in the chairs, that's where we get our we get our down moments and you have to pick yourself up, and keep going. And as a studio, we do that. The directors do that all the time, but as story people, you have to do that as well. And, it's honestly, it's one of the biggest challenges of working there as a story person. Well, I say generally, I shouldn't specific, but is to find a way to maintain that enthusiasm over that long thing and remind yourself of what you love about the medium and like the worthiness of the goal, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it does get hard and you don't think it's going to work for most of the movie. I mean, we're talking, if I want a movie for 3 years, 2 years of that, the movie doesn't work. I mean, it's not good. It's not good. It's not good.
Yeah.
And we're all in it together. And there's a bunch of time where you're just flying on faith and the belief in the people you're working with that you're going to solve it eventually, but it's not solved now. And I sort of feel like that became like, as I started to think about my life to do this, I started thinking about like, as a kid, I recognized early, I guess, that I was a work in progress and that, I started to think about holding myself to a standard that was impossible to achieve. And just because, again, you got to climb the mountain to see further.
What set that in you? Was that just a part of you? That was just your nature? That's incredible.
No, I mean, I think, again, I when I was a kid, I grew up in a university town. My city's famous for this, actually, where people will walk up to you. There's a lot of bars and stuff near the high schools where people will walk up to you and be like, hey, what's up? And punch you in the face. And you've never seen them before. You don't know why they're there.
Oh, okay.
And I told this story to a bunch of friends of mine in Toronto, and one of them happened to be from London. Or they all were from London, that was what it was. And one of the persons was like, that's never happened to me. And like literally every other person, the 6 people in the circle were like, oh yeah, that totally happened to me.
Jeez.
And so I grew up in that a way where I sort of felt like I didn't like where I was, or I didn't like, I always had this idea that that there must be a continuity. Like people don't just become don't just start that way.
Right.
Right. And I used to think, I remember very clearly when I was a kid thinking that people with talent were like anointed, and that if you were going to become someone like Einstein, like I took a ton of IQ tests when I was a kid, and I was like fascinated by the idea of like sort of like preternatural ability that you just like you either have it or you don't.
Right.
And the more that I realized that, the more that I got older, the more that I realized that like the variety of what art is and the variety of people that make art, that like anyone can make art. It's really about, are you in tune? Are you able to put eyes on yourself and talk about something in a real way and be honest and be vulnerable and acknowledge that things hurt and to then talk about it,
Yes. Holy. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think early, I kind of understood that early because I had a bunch of like creative writing assignments to talk about, or I had to write. For my last year of high school, I had to write. I wrote a book of short stories and a book of poems, and that was like my assignment. That's all I did all year. That was like my assignment.
How fun!
Yeah.
Nor not at all.
Yeah, no, it was. But like, at that point, because like again in Canada, it's great. I feel like I've always had these like rep theaters to go to or independent bookstores to go to where I would read. By the time I was like 15, I was reading Ginsberg and I was reading. Like I read Howl at 14. I want to say.
Oh my God.
And like the idea that like the greatest minds in my generation destroyed by madness. At 14, you hear that and you're like, oh my God, like that's tectonic. It shifts everything. And I was like, who is this guy? And I would just learn about all these folks. And I was trying to write to that level. So like all I could see was like, well, I'm not Seamus Haney, certainly. But again, I was 14. Like, what do I know?
Yeah, you're a kid.
Yeah, but I would like internalize what they were talking about and like how simple what they were talking about was described, but how moving it was and how like there was a philosophical idea at work. And so, I think I didn't know how to articulate it or anything like that. But I had a tremendous amount of anxiety surrounding it. And it was something that I was concerned about. I think, making things that are bad, I think the instant thing that people say is like, I'm a bad artist or I can't draw or all of these things. And once you figure out that like everyone learned how to do this, like, there are people who are super talented. I think my wife is one of them. I think she has a gift for it. And I never thought about myself as having a gift. But none of that really matters, I think, at a point once you start to do it, because you either love it or you don't. And if you love it, it doesn't matter really. Like, again, it's to the point of working at Pixar. It's like, yeah, I work at Pixar and I love my job and everything. But what it really comes down to is like, especially now with COVID, like I sit at my kitchen table and I try to experience things and have feelings that I can communicate. But it's like, I sit at a kitchen table. Like, it's not like it hasn't really changed from when I was in high school, sitting at a kitchen table, trying to write a book of poems that didn't make sense,
For sure.
And I think that's something that there's a tremendous, I love chefs and I love cooking and I find a tremendous link between people who make food with a philosophical imperative to nurture and to sustain to what we do. That we try to tell stories to nurture and sustain and to take the sort of like dark things that we all fear and to sort of shed light on them so that we can, all communally experience the sort of, again, it's like what I think Pixar does. We offer catharsis, we take
100%.
We take the feelings that people have that are difficult to acknowledge and difficult to express. And then we turn the lights off and we show you a movie where we can walk you through that. And we can, as a filmmaking community, we can walk you through that and we can all talk about it together, even though we're not in the same room at the time. And there's a chef in Chef's Table. I'm very inspired by this woman.
I've seen a few seasons. Is it an older season?
It's the season 3. It's Chung Kwan, the Korean monk. And she talks about making...
Yes. Yeah, I saw that.
She talks about making soy sauce and about how she cooks with time. And I thought like, oh my God, that's such a genius, because we all think about writing as this like process where you write something down and you cut it. And it's very, but the truth is, it's very violent almost in terms of like, you write something, you cut it, you analyze it. Yeah. And really she just says like, I let it grow and the flavors will come and I cook with time. And I thought like, as people, we are all cooked with time. And you know, I think about things in that now of like, things will develop and things will grow. And she talks about making soy sauce, and that when she makes soy sauce, it's like, because it takes time, it's like the soy sauce that I make now, I will experience later. And it's all part of one continuity. And I sort of feel like the stuff that you make when you're a teenager or you're a young child or you're older than I am now or what I'm doing now, like everything informs the next thing. And so failure really becomes relative at that point. You know, like when you zoom out, you go like, yeah, I'm not doing so great now, but who knows that I might be paving the way for something cathartic later for myself.
Right.
And, you know, my wife actually is a production designer, the first feature production designer, I think, at Pixar. And that's a female. And when we were in school together, after school, we both kind of I was very driven and she wasn't. She was not sure what she wanted to do. And she got lost and she didn't draw for 5 years. And she didn't draw for herself. She didn't make projects and she was really questioning it.
No.
And then I got a job at Pixar, and then she came, and the minute she set foot in the doors, she was like, I'm coming here. And about a year later, she was hired.
Wow.
And so I think it's, you don't know what's around the corner ever.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think like again, as a metaphor for screening cycles, like you never know when you're going to crack it. You never know when you're going to solve the problem. And the harder the problem, the more worthwhile it is to solve, you know? And yeah, I think we're all kind of in that way. And I think it's one of those things that you kind of, when you're a kid, I think you have, when things are hard, I think it's easy to look inward and turn things inward, but
meaning sort of self-blame.
Yeah. And sort of, you know, judge yourself and label yourself, which I think is really bad. But, you know, I think as I've gotten older and as I've worked as an artist longer, the more I feel like all the things I've ever had in my life that were really, really hard, and that if I could cry uncle and escape, I would have, they've ended up becoming strengths pretty much every time.
So true. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And I think we're working at a place where, again, you know, sometimes they tap me on the shoulder and say, okay, you got to go pitch to 80 people now. And I have to stand in the screening room with people. I don't really know the material sometimes as well as I should. You learn to roll with it. And, you know, it's like, you know, when I think back of like when I was like 16 and dreading the future and painting graffiti and not knowing what I was going to do, not knowing how school was going to work, the amount of dread that I felt then, I was like, this is nothing compared to that, you know?
I've been through worse, sure.
Yeah. So you sort of, it puts everything into perspective for you. And I found that with Pixar, the more we do screenings, the more it gets put into perspective. Because you go, yeah, this one's not so great, but we'll get them next time. And it allows you to sort of just focus on the task at hand a little bit more rather than like, taking it on, again, like you said, blaming yourself for what you're doing. Because that's the easiest way to shut down creativity, I think, is to really let that negativity in and that judgment, because, you know, it starts to fulfill itself, you know, it starts to become something you can't get out of.
It festers, it grows. I love what you said about the cooking with time. That's definitely something I struggle with. I'm very much like an eat it raw, keep checking the oven until it's done type of gal. Yeah. So the idea of cooking with time, that's something that I will remind myself. And I mean, ideally daily, so that I can keep that kind of in my mind. So thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah.
I want to be mindful of your time here. If you don't mind, I've just kind of got 2 wrap-up questions, then I'll let you go.
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
This has been such a fulfilling conversation. I've really gotten so much out of it, so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise.
So I wanted to circle back to that story that you shared about getting that rejection from, was it DreamWorks?
Yeah, DreamWorks, yeah.
And then the fact that you walked around the block and went back down and started drawing again. Like that sort of turnaround, I feel like is such an important thing Well, first off, as I said, it speaks a lot to your character and who you are as a person, who you are as an artist. But also, I feel like there's so much in that that I would love for you to share to some listeners, as well as actually for myself, because I think that turnaround, like, how do you expedite that turnaround? How do you get to the place where you get a rejection that really stings, that really hurts to your core? You're like, this was my dream. What's happening? And how do you face those thoughts, those fears of, oh, I'm no good. Oh, I'm a failure. Oh, this didn't happen, to the point where you sit back down and you get back to work, you get back to the passion, you get back in it.
Yeah. Okay. So this is not a great answer, maybe. But like I said, when I was young, I dealt with a lot of like violence, and I didn't know it at the time. But when I was having anxiety and stuff when I was 16, it was probably PTSD. When I hear about it now and go, oh, okay, that sounds familiar.
Wow.
And there was a point when I was like 18 years old when I thought, like, I went to a doctor and they said, like, okay, you're obviously dealing with something. And they didn't really know what it was. Like you said, the conversations weren't the same then. So I got all these like x-rays and tests, and I was having ulcers and puking blood and stuff. Again, I apologize, not a great answer, but there was a point where I very clearly told myself that I was like living with this anxiety, and I was like stressing it so much, and I was like not getting out of bed. And there was a point where I was like, okay, what's the worst that's going to happen? What, I die? Like, I end up, going crazy or something? Like, I don't know. What's the worst that's going to happen? Okay. I die. Okay, I die. And then I don't know what's happening because I'm dead. Okay, now I don't have to be afraid of anything. And it's like, and I like internalized that. Like, I don't have to be afraid. What's the worst that's going to happen? And then the more I started thinking about, when I really looked at, like, what is the worst that can happen? And talking myself out of that and saying, like, well, if I was going to die, I probably would have died by now because of this anxiety. Like, that would have, if it was going to happen, it would have happened.
Yeah.
So, but if I let it keep happening, then it will never go away. And then it got to the point where I was like, I think part of it is my environment. I'm going to move away to school. And then I moved away to school. And then within 6 months, it was gone. And a lot of it was just like, I just told myself, that I have to just keep moving forward. And, again, it was that idea I kept telling myself, like, then, not now. I was like, what I'm now is not forever. And if I love this thing enough and I push this thing enough, that I will be able to fight my way out of this. I will be able to create a future for myself where this isn't part of it. But if I let it in, and this isn't a great necessarily answer for everyone, and everyone's different, but for me, the more that I stared at it and acknowledged it and said, like, yeah, I am terrified, I can't go to school. Like, in the class that I talked about, my English class, I ended up in the class, I got 98% in the class. Out of a total of 120 classes, I went to 12 because I couldn't get out of bed. Like, I was soaked with anxiety and I was always terrified of everything. And so later, when I got that call from DreamWorks and they said, we're not interested, I had the sinking feeling, felt the anxiety. I felt the terror for the future. I felt the sense that I wasn't what I was supposed to be. And I thought, what's the worst that's going to happen? What's the worst that's going to happen? Before that call was that call. And I got the call and I'm still standing. I'm still here. So
that's great.
Really, it's like, I'm just back to where I was 10 minutes ago. So let me just go back to what I was doing 10 minutes ago, which was working on myself and working on my thing and doing the thing that I love. And, if DreamWorks doesn't want me, that's fine. Like, I'll figure it out. And, I think it's, people are amazing and individuals are amazing. And we're all the multitude. And I think it's important that even when things get really terrible, not to forget that and to recognize that, we are all, if you really want to become something, you'll figure it out. You'll find a way. And, it's really about not comparing myself to the fictitious person who got the job that I didn't get, but comparing myself to the person who doesn't need to go to DreamWorks because I go to Pixar instead, and I think it's just keeping my eyes on that. Again, it just helped me go right back to what I was doing. And it's one of those things that with this kind of thing, we all do this, making movies and doing art and doing what you do and what I do is irrational. And so if you look for rational reasons to do things, you're never going to find them because there's no practical reason for us to make movies or to tell stories. That it's completely, it's easy to shut it down by saying like, well, you'll never make money or no one will understand you or the thing that you want to say is not worth saying.
Yeah.
And those are rational things. But no one ever made a book or wrote a play or made a movie because of something rational. It's because you are possessed by something you feel the need to talk about. And so you just, artists, we have to lead with that a little bit and say like, rationally, yeah, I should be really upset that a studio doesn't like me or that I'm not good enough. But irrationally, it's like, but that doesn't change anything. I still love what I do. I still want to keep doing it. So let's do it, And so, yeah, and that's actually something we talk about a lot in when I'm helping folks make movies now is that, yeah, it's not rational. And so the more you try to rationalize an impulse or the more that you try to, it's different. You have to learn to understand it, but if you rationalize it, it's not supposed to be rational. It's not supposed to be rational.
Sure.
It's crazy.
It's really inspiring how you just face the anxieties head on to the point of facing your own mortality. Like I applaud you on that. That's really some next level stuff.
I think I got to the point at that age where I didn't really feel like there's a ton of options, where,
Sure.
And to be honest, like when I was doing that stuff in Toy Story 3, when I was drawing all that incinerator stuff, that scene for me is about I internalized it like we are all on the slide to something, and somebody's closer to the hot center where you evaporate, and some people are further back. And I was thinking, and my mom, like I said, my mom was sick at the time, and I was thinking about me not being there with her, and the time that I had to do with what I was doing with the time I was given.
Right.
Again, all these things inform who you are and the work you do and the life you lead. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's all one thing. I think we like to compartmentalize things so that cause and effect make more sense than they should.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
Things.
I'm always trying to do that.
Yeah, and it's not. I think like I said, that we're in an irrational calling. Let's just say it. It's not going to work irrationally.
Yeah. And then finally, what advice would you give to artists or anybody out there who feels like they have some sort of story to tell, feels like they know that there's that inkling, there's that whisper of, oh, I know I want to talk about something, but they might not know what it is yet. They might not have access to their voice or their storytelling abilities yet, but they know that they've got that burning. They know that it's there somewhere. What advice would you give to them on how to start, where to begin?
Find a community. No one ever did anything on their own, and I think the greater you want to be, the greater the people around you need to be too, when I talked earlier about my wife as a production designer at Pixar, and she's an absolute rock star. A friend of mine also started at Pixar at the same time as I did. We're all part of a community, and we pushed each other, and we all had these stories to tell, and we were all like little ducklings that didn't know how to talk about all this stuff. And so we would just talk to each other all the time. And in development, like I said, there's directors at Pixar in development, and they're friends of mine, and they'll call me at 11 at night or text me and be like, I don't understand this. Let's talk about it. And that's like the biggest thing, really. I mean, everyone always says that like storytelling is a team sport, which I think is true. But like, even when they talk about things like the auteurs, like when it comes to Godard and Truffaut and all these amazing filmmakers, they had each other. Like they challenged each other. They were collaborators for a while. And when you think about like early Spielberg, He's collaborating with like Coppola.
That group. Oh my God.
Yeah. And I think, it all comes back to like not doing it alone. Like it's kind of what Pixar's about. Even when you're not getting along, even when the story's hard, it's like, it's way easier to get through it if you have other people with you. And, I think it's like, again, in an irrational sense, like if someone pitches you a story that they feel and they don't have all the things worked out, but the person knows you and they know what you're trying to do, they will jump in with 50 ideas for how to unlock you and get you going and make the thing work. And I've never not seen it work, And again, you have to be true. The caveat I would offer is that like, you have to be true collaborators. Like, it can't be this like kind of convenient thing of like, I'll help you with this, you help me with that. Like, you have to be able to
transactional. Sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna help you with this, and if I never see any like buzz off of it or whatever, if I don't, that's fine. Like, it has to be altruistic, and again, irrational. But that's the way I think it all works. That everyone finds the group that they can sort of kick off of, and spend time with, and get to know each other, so that when it comes time to make something, it's much easier, And again, I think, we all talk about, like, every film that I've ever seen that has moved me, I've been like, oh my God, like, we all like the director's names on it, but there's a guy standing just off camera with a clipboard, eating a Cliff Bar. And then they brought it to an editor who had to understand that director's intention. And those people are all surrounded by people who have the best interest of the movie at heart, or the best interest of whatever it is at heart. And so I think, one of the benefits of being an artist is that you find ways to be vulnerable with people, to tell a good story, which is tremendously rewarding for the person, regardless of the product. And, you don't really get that if you're doing other like, I mean, I don't know what it's like to work in finance or whatever, but, I'm not sure that you have the same thing. And, I'd also say that, it's a tough one, but it's really easy to judge yourself and to judge the thing that you're saying. And I would just ask anyone who wants to make something or wants to develop something to remember that, like, it takes time, and that even at Pixar, where we're supposed to know what we're doing, we do 8 screenings and we get lost and we struggle. And again, like, wow, some of our screenings, like, you would not believe them. And it's not a straight line. It's not like we don't go from like bad to great to amazing. We always talk about, like, it takes 10 bad ideas to make a decent idea. And then it takes 100 decent ideas to make a great idea. And it takes 100 great ideas to make a really amazing idea. Mm-hmm. So just start making that idea, because it's just how it works. Like, you have to build, and you have to invent. You have to be patient with yourself, find a community, and if you love it, figure it out.